On the evening of December 7, 1941, as the sun sank behind the desert horizon of New Mexico, a 60-year-old dentist from Pennsylvania named Lytle S. Adams was driving back from a visit to Carlsbad Caverns when his car radio interrupted the quiet with shattering news. Japanese forces had attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States was now at war. While the nation would soon fix its attention on aircraft carriers, battleships, and the vast machinery of global conflict, Adams's mind moved in an entirely different direction. Only hours earlier, he had stood at the mouth of the massive cavern and watched millions of Mexican free-tailed bats explode from the darkness at dusk. The sky had turned into a living torrent of wings, a biological river that took more than 5 hours to fully pour from the cave. The column of bats stretched over 15 feet in diameter, and was so dense that he could feel and hear the rush of air created by their flight. As the desert blurred past his windshield that night, Adams became consumed by a vision so strange that it would eventually become one of the most unconventional weapons concepts ever seriously funded by the U.S. military. Adams was not an eccentric drifter with wild theories scribbled on napkins. He was an experienced inventor with a history of practical innovation. Years earlier, he had developed a successful mid-air mail pickup system that allowed aircraft to retrieve mail without landing. He had even demonstrated the system personally for First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, flying her himself to showcase its reliability. That single encounter established a personal credibility that most ordinary citizens could never acquire. It was precisely that connection that would later open doors normally sealed shut to unconventional thinkers. When Adams now considered the incredible sight of those bats flooding the New Mexico sky, he no longer saw a natural wonder. He saw a delivery system. Barely a month after Pearl Harbor, on January 12, 1942, Adams placed his proposal directly before President Franklin D. Roosevelt. His opening words were bold and unsettling. He wrote that he was submitting a plan designed to terrify, demoralize, and inflame the population of the Japanese Empire. His reasoning only grew more extraordinary. He claimed that throughout history bats had symbolized darkness and evil, and that God himself had placed vast colonies of them in American caves, specifically for use in this moment of global crisis. It was an uneasy mix of military engineering and theological destiny. Under ordinary circumstances, such a letter would have been quietly discarded. Instead, it landed on the president's desk at exactly the moment when the nation was desperate for any advantage. Roosevelt forwarded the proposal to William Wild Bill Donovan, head of the Office of Strategic Services. Along with it, he added a handwritten note that would later become famous. The president assured Donovan that Adams was not a lunatic. He admitted the idea sounded wildly unorthodox, but stated that it deserved careful examination. That single sentence ensured the proposal would be taken seriously by the American war machine. Donovan passed the concept to scientific authorities for evaluation. One of them was Harvard zoologist Donald Griffin, a leading expert on bat navigation who would later coin the term echolocation. Griffin called Adams's proposal bizarre yet visionary. After studying the biological mechanics involved, he concluded that if the plan were executed competently, it could actually work. By the spring of the United States military was officially investigating the use of bats as incendiary delivery devices. Adams assembled a peculiar team whose members were selected more for personality and availability than for strict technical credentials. A mammologist from the Los Angeles County Museum joined the effort. A young Hollywood actor and stunt pilot named Tim Holt, only 24 years old at the time, became involved. Holt would later achieve fame starring alongside Humphrey Bogart in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Two brothers, who had previously worked as hotel managers and fitness instructors, were recruited. A former gangster who claimed ties to Al Capone joined the operation. Even high school students served as laboratory assistants. Security protocols were loose, and secrecy relied more on classification than discipline. It was an unusual assemblage for a project that would soon attract military funding and oversight. The logic behind the target was chillingly clear. Japanese cities were uniquely vulnerable to fire. Unlike European urban centers built largely from brick and stone, over 65% of Japanese urban construction used traditional wood and paper. Roofs were wooden shingles or thatch. Walls were framed in thin timber. Interior partitions were simple paper screens. Tokyo itself was one of the most densely populated cities on Earth, with some districts exceeding 135,000 residents per square mile. The entire capital city was protected by fewer than 8,000 firefighters, just over 1,000 pieces of equipment, and only 3 extension ladders for a population of millions. Water pressure was unreliable, and fewer than 2% of civilians had access to bomb-proof shelters. More than half of Japan's industrial capacity was scattered among residential neighborhoods instead of concentrated in clearly defined factory zones. A fire starting inside ordinary homes could quickly cripple the nation's war production. Japan's vulnerability to fire was well known long before the Second World War. During the Edo period, the city now called Tokyo had endured nearly 50 catastrophic fires. The Great Fire of 1857 destroyed 35,000 buildings over 2 days. After the massive earthquake of 1923, Firestorms killed more than 120,000 people and incinerated nearly two-thirds of the city's structures. American planners studied this history carefully. The question was not whether Japan would burn, but how best to ignite it. Adams and his team began a sweeping biological survey of North America's bat populations. They visited more than 1,000 caves and 3,000 abandoned mines across the American Southwest, mapping roost locations and colony sizes. Some species were quickly ruled out. The mastiff bat could lift nearly a pound of payload, but its population was too small for military-scale deployment. The mouse-eared bat could carry small charges but was too fragile for practical use. The solution emerged in the Mexican free-tailed bat. Between 50 and 100 million of these animals lived in Texas and New Mexico alone. Carlsbad Caverns contained roughly 9 million. Bracken Cave near San Antonio harbored around 20 million, making it the largest bat colony in the world. Ney Cave near Bandera added another 20 to 30 million. These bats routinely carried 3 times their body weight in flight. Pregnant females flew while carrying twins, demonstrating exceptional lifting ability. Most importantly, their roosting instinct drove them into dark, enclosed spaces at dawn, precisely the places where hidden fires would be most difficult to detect and extinguish. Capturing the bats was thought to be simple. Large nets mounted on 10-foot poles could be swept across cave openings during the evening emergence. 3 passes could collect 100 bats per net, with permanent screened enclosures placed over major roosts. Planners believed that hundreds of thousands of bats could be captured each night. The real challenge lay in developing an incendiary device small enough to be carried by a bat and reliable enough to ignite deep inside enemy structures. That challenge was solved by one of the most important chemists of the war. Louis Fieser, a Harvard organic chemist who had developed military napalm in early 1942, was recruited to design the payload. By an extraordinary coincidence, Fieser was an old college roommate of Donald Griffin. His work on incendiaries made him the perfect candidate. He created 2 versions of what became known as the H2 unit. The smaller weighed 17 grams and burned for 4 minutes with a 10-inch flame. The larger weighed 28 grams and produced a 12-inch flame for 6 minutes. Both were constructed from nitrocellulose casings filled with thickened kerosene, essentially miniature napalm bombs about the size of a human finger. The ignition mechanism was deceptively simple. A firing pin was held under spring tension by a thin steel wire. When the device was armed, a copper chloride solution was injected into a small cavity where the wire passed through. Over the next 15 to 30 minutes, the corrosive chemicals slowly ate through the metal. When the wire finally broke, the spring drove the firing pin forward, igniting the incendiary charge. The delay allowed time for the bats to be released, dispersed, and find roosting spots inside buildings before the fire began. The delivery system was just as elaborate. Sheet metal canisters nearly 5 feet long were built to house stacked circular trays. Each tray measured about 30 inches in diameter and contained 40 compartments. A single canister could carry approximately 1,040 bats. The canisters themselves were manufactured by an unlikely industrial partner, the Crosby Research Foundation, a venture established by entertainer Bing Crosby and his brothers. Timing components were supplied by the A.C. Gilbert Company, famous for manufacturing children's erector sets. B-24 Liberator bombers would carry up to 100 canisters each. At roughly 5,000 feet, the canisters would be released. At 4,000 feet, parachutes would deploy, causing the outer shells to fall away. The stacked trays would separate gradually while remaining attached to the parachute, descending like a mechanical accordion. As they fell, warm air would awaken the bats from artificial hibernation. Once fully conscious, the animals would fly off to seek shelter within buildings below, each carrying a live incendiary charge. The full operational blueprint was breathtaking in scale. 10 B-24 bombers would fly from Alaska toward industrial targets around Osaka Bay. Each aircraft would carry 100 canisters. Each mission would release over 1 million armed bats across Japanese cities. In theory, each bat would independently seek out a dark roosting space within enemy structures. Thousands of tiny fires would ignite not on rooftops or streets, but inside attics, walls, and enclosed wooden cavities where firefighters could not reach them in time. Initial testing in 1943 revealed serious problems. On May 21st, bats were dropped from a B-25 bomber over Morock Lake in California. Many of the animals struck the ground and died. The hibernation temperature had been set too low, preventing them from awakening in time to fly. Adjustments were made and further tests conducted. But another event occurred just days earlier that would permanently mark the project in military memory. On May 15, 1943, a demonstration was conducted at the Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Base in New Mexico. The base was newly constructed and not yet occupied. Fieser had successfully shown Army photographers how the incendiary devices were attached to the bats using dummy charges. The photographers then requested staged images using live incendiaries for realism. Despite the obvious risks, permission was granted. The intense desert heat prematurely awakened several bats inside the facility. A door was accidentally left open. About 6 armed bats escaped into the open sky. Roughly 15 minutes later, the precise duration of the copper chloride delay the first explosion occurred. A barracks burst into flames. Moments later, the control tower ignited. Then the hangars began to burn in sequence. A fuel tank was destroyed. A general's car was consumed by fire. Because the project was classified, local civilian firefighters were forbidden from entering the base. The blaze spread virtually unchecked. Large portions of the airfield were destroyed. In his official report, Captain WWII carefully stated that the test was concluded when a fire destroyed a significant amount of the materials. Fieser omitted the incident entirely from his published papers, later remarking only that a small mistake had occurred. Adams, ever optimistic, viewed the disaster as proof of success. He argued that the accidental fire had demonstrated exactly what the weapon was supposed to do. The Army, embarrassed by the incident, soon distanced itself from the project. In August 1943, responsibility transferred to the Navy, and the initiative was formally renamed Project X. By December, the Marine Corps was conducting large-scale tests at WWII Proving Ground in Utah. The Chemical Warfare Service constructed a realistic Japanese village for the trials. It was designed by Antoine Raymond, an architect with years of experience building in Japan, and advised by Boris Lang, an expert on Japanese fire behavior who had studied the Tokyo firestorm of 1923. The test village was built with extraordinary attention to authenticity. Construction crews, including prisoners from the Utah State Prison, erected wooden homes with accurate spacing and humidity conditions. Interiors were furnished with more than 700 cloth items such as tatami mats and clothing. Cabinets were stocked with chopsticks, futons, hibachi stoves, and children's toys to replicate real fire behavior. When the Marine Corps conducted its tests from December 13 to December 15, 1943, the results stunned observers. 30 fires were started using bat-delivered and 22 burned out on their own as anticipated, but 4 developed into blazes that would have required professional firefighting crews to contain. Ultimately, the simulated village burned to the ground. The chief of incendiary testing at WWII reported that a reasonable number of destructive fires could be reliably started despite the extremely small size of each unit. He noted that the greatest advantage lay in the undetected placement of incendiaries inside structures, where fires could grow unnoticed before alarms were raised. An observer from the National Defense Research Committee concluded simply that the weapon was effective. Comparative analysis revealed just how dramatic the advantage could be. Standard incendiary bomb loads were expected to start between 167 and 400 fires in a typical strike. Project X-ray was projected to ignite between 3,625 and 4,748 fires under similar conditions. This represented an 11 to 21-fold increase in fire starting efficiency. Planners estimated that the bats could disperse across a radius of 20 to 40 miles from the release point, igniting thousands of fires over a vastly larger area than conventional bombing patterns could ever reach. Adams summarized the effect in vivid terms, envisioning thousands of fires erupting simultaneously over a circular region, 40 miles in diameter. The entire program had cost roughly $2 million, equivalent to about $35 million in modern currency. Manufacturing partners and collection teams stood ready to supply 1 million bats for operational deployment. Combat readiness appeared imminent. Then, in mid-1944, Fleet Admiral Ernest King learned that the weapon would not be fully operational until mid-1945. That timing proved fatal. The Manhattan Project, America's atomic bomb program, was racing toward the same deadline. One project cost $2 million. The other consumed nearly $2 billion. Both promised decisive power. Only one offered an immediate and unquestionable end to the war. After brief consideration, King dismissed Project X-ray entirely. Adams returned from Washington confused and bitter. He told colleagues that high-ranking officers seemed distracted by another secret project occurring somewhere in the desert. He dismissed it as nonsensical. That nonsense was the atomic bomb being built at Los Alamos. In retrospect, one young team member later observed that there was little point in perfecting bat bombs once nuclear weapons existed. Tim Holt returned to Hollywood after flying combat missions in the Pacific and earning the Distinguished Flying Cross. Fieser resumed his academic career and later urged President Nixon to ban the use of napalm in Vietnam. Adams continued inventing until his death in 1970, never abandoning his belief that his weapon would have been more humane than nuclear destruction. Project X-ray joined the strange catalog of nearly forgotten animal weapons. The Soviet Union deployed anti-tank dogs that allegedly destroyed hundreds of German armored vehicles before the program collapsed. British intelligence attempted to use explosive-filled rats hidden in coal supplies as sabotage devices. Achieving psychological success after the first discovery generated mass paranoia. Psychologist B.F. Skinner trained pigeons to guide missiles through optical targeting systems before the idea was repeatedly revived and abandoned. Of all such attempts, the bat bomb was arguably the most scientifically validated before cancellation. History offers an unsettling comparison. On the night of March 10, 1945, 334 B-29 bombers dropped more than 1,600 tons of incendiaries on Tokyo. The resulting firestorm killed between 80,000 and 100,000 people in a single night, making it the deadliest air raid in human history. Conventional bombs ignited where they fell. Bat bombs would have distributed themselves into the most flammable recesses of homes and workshops before igniting unseen. Adams believed to his final days that his weapon could have devastated Japan with far fewer casualties than atomic bombs. Whether that belief would have survived the reality of millions of simultaneous hidden fires remains one of history's unanswerable questions. In the end, Project X-ray became a footnote, a curious intersection of biology, desperation, and technological ingenuity. It began with a Pennsylvania dentist driving through the New Mexico desert, listening to news of war while watching bats vanish into darkness. Where others saw simple animals, he saw a weapon. He carried his impossible idea to the President of the United States and received not ridicule, but funding. His bats accidentally burned down an American airfield. His tests proved the concept viable. His weapon stood ready while Japan's cities of wood and paper waited across the ocean. And then the atom split, reshaping the future of warfare forever. $2 million, 3 years of development, a handful of escaped bats, and one man's audacious vision vanished beneath the shadow of the nuclear age.